Do you feel valued at work? Do you feel valued at home? How much do you value yourself? Today, as always, I'm joined by my good friend Rachel Davidson. Rachel is the author of The Point of Me, and I am the author of a number of books, including Chariots on Fire and Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. And both of us, I'm very proud and pleased to say, are international best-selling authors. We're going to be exploring the whole business about value. What value do you put on yourself? What value do you believe other people put on you? And where's the balance between who you take notice of? Whether for you, you're only valued if it's other people who value you, or whether valuing yourself carries more weight. Because in that whole business around value, it determines so much about the quality of the relationships that we have with self and others, doesn't it?
Yes.
And so many people are working within a situation where they believe that other people don't value them. So for me, it's a two-way thing. It's about how do you value yourself, and how do you demonstrate that you value other people?
Yes.
And then the other way around, how do you value, how do you know you're valued by yourself, and how do you know you're valued by other people? And what do you do if you have a sense that you are not valued by either?
Yes, and there's like there's an external signs, aren't there, of how you value yourself, and also then the internal. I mean, the external, I think, comes from the internal, but sometimes you have to start on the external. I mean, I was put in mind of some advice I was given as a youngster in terms of, how you dress and why it's important to dress the part.
And whatever that part may be.
Whatever that is. So one of my managers said, dress for the job that you want, not the job that you've got.
Yes.
And that was all, some people can dismiss clothes and fashion as being a little bit superficial, but in actual fact, it is a way of demonstrating the value that you hold for yourself. So keeping yourself neat and tidy and well-groomed shows that you value yourself enough to take that time and do it, just as a little example.
But it's interesting, isn't it? We often talk about you only get one chance to make a good first impression.
Yeah.
And depending on which group you're talking about, will determine what constitutes making a good first impression.
Yeah.
So if you're part of a reggae band, for example, a good first impression may look very different to if you're wanting a job in a bank.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that people have very different views about that are really important.
Yeah.
I'm reminded when I was a young teacher, I was putting up an exhibition, and it was for an environmental award. And I was working at the Teachers' Centre, and I was there one weekend, and the young gentleman who was had been paid to open the hall and to help me arrived wearing bother boots, shorts, a singlet with holes in. He was tattooed from head to foot. He had a bone through his nose. He had lots of piercings.
Which, back in the day,
we're talking about in the 70s.
Yeah, that was quite unusual.
And my first impression was to be very, very wary of him because he looked so different. And quite frankly, he looked fairly terrifying.
Yeah.
But the more I talked to him, the more I found he did voluntary work with the disabled. He looked after his mum, who had a significant health problem. He was kind, he was gentle, he was caring. And the look and the how he presented himself in terms of his behaviours was completely different.
You could argue, see, that he valued himself and his
he
internal
didn't care
values.
Actually what other people thought. He had done these things to please him.
He dressed authentically, and so therefore, actually, you could argue he valued himself
I would
very
argue
highly, to be courageous, to do something quite unusual in those days, wasn't it? To dress and be tattooed like that.
And what it taught me is how easy it is to be judgmental about what we see, and to take the time not to make value judgments about how people look or how people speak or, you know, where they are from. And I'm not talking about geographical necessarily. No. It could be geography, it could be in terms of their status or whatever.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful to that young man because he taught me very early on in my adult life a very, very big lesson.
Well, as authors, we're both very sensitive to the fact that people do judge a book by its cover.
Don't they just?
And the heartache that we put into those cover designs.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a very natural human instinct, behaviour, isn't it? To make judgments based on appearances.
But it's also interesting how we judge what value people put on us. So some of the times, particularly in the families, that value will be around whether we are noticed, whether we're given compliments, whether people ask us for help.
Yeah.
In a work context, I think there's another dimension because it's often based on how much we're paid.
Yes.
And in fact, we were asked a question, weren't we, around, you know, what do you do if you're in the workplace and you believe your value is much greater than you're being paid, and then another job comes up and you are offered a lot more money.
Yes.
And you know that your current firm can't afford to pay you.
Yes.
Should you just go with no sense of any responsibility to the first company?
Yeah.
Or where does that leave you?
Yeah, because this lady that emailed she had a sort of a tearing. She was torn really because on the face of it you'd think, oh hell, you'd go for more money because it was a significantly big jump in salary.
It was about 10k, wasn't it?
So, but her dilemma was that actually she really liked her boss.
Yeah.
She had a good relationship. Yeah. She quite liked the job. It's just that she knew she was underpaid for what the market. And she felt suspicious about the fact that the company was saying they couldn't afford because they were spending money in other areas. So she sort of felt slightly betrayed at that level.
Yeah.
But even so, even with a big job offer, big, massive pay rise, she still felt some level of guilt at doing what I think a lot of people would just say, well, that's a no-brainer. But for her, it wasn't.
No.
And that was really down to the specific question she had, wasn't it, was, should I ask my boss for a raise, even though I know they won't give me the full 10, but they might give me a bit more?
I think for me, there's a number of things at play here. One is one's own value system, your core values are at play here. And for many people, money is the ultimate motivator.
Yes.
And if that's the case, I suspect that those people would have no difficulty. I've been offered more money, I'm off.
Yes.
However, if your core values are around belonging and doing a good job, and that it's important to you that actually you like the people you're working with and that you enjoy the work you're doing, and money is not your major motivator but is a motivator, then for me I think it's to go and have an honest conversation with that boss and say, this is not about blackmail, because that's how it could come across. Give me more money.
Yeah.
But saying, look, I like where I am. I've been offered this job with a lot more money. The market value for the job that I do is more than I'm getting. Before I just give in my notice, I just wanted to present that to you and give you an opportunity to think about it and think about whether there was any capacity to move and to see whether we can come to an accommodation.
It was funny, when I read that question, I know my emotional first response was, if they don't see my value enough to pay me a good wage when I've asked for rises in the past, if they only see it at the point when I am threatening to leave, then I don't want to be part of this organisation.
And I think that for many people is a valid argument, but you've got to put into the mix that she liked a boss, she liked the job.
Yeah.
I suspect that when it's never black and white, and I think the danger is that we see this as black and white.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking you down, but just some questions really, and they're a bit rhetorical. Can you have a bit rhetorical? Anyway, they're a rhetorical question. Is there's assumptions being made that A, she's not valued,
Yep.
that B, the company that actually has thought about the comparative value or even know what the comparative values are. They may, but they may not. That there are not other things going on behind the scenes that you have no knowledge of, which may mean that the person really does value you, but actually they're in financial difficulty, and they're trying to keep the company afloat.
Yes.
Now, I don't know any of those answers, and there may be a lot of other questions that one could ask.
Yes.
But unless you have the open and honest conversation,
yes,
you're never going to know. And even if you do have the open and honest conversation on your side, there's no guarantee that the other person is going to be honest and open.
No, quite.
So what we do is we make these judgments about what's going on. The judgments and the value we put on ourselves, we're doing it in terms of every aspect of our lives. So the judgment was when you were talking about yourself was, if they valued me, they'd notice and they'd pay me.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how often people are oblivious. They're just busy doing their own stuff, so they don't think outside that box.
Yeah.
One could argue that they should, but if it's not on your radar, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm also reminded of, when I was a head teacher, I used to hate May because it was a time when people would put their notice in for leaving in September.
Yeah.
In teaching, you could only, in the UK, you can only put your notice in 28th of February, 31st of May, and 31st of October.
Right.
Because of the amount of notice.
Holidays, yeah.
And people would come and they'd have that voice. Gina, I need to have a word. And I think, and in this particular month, I had 5 in a week.
Wow.
And the problem for me was that we had a very poor budget, and that we did a lot of work in the first 3 years. So people were ready for promotion.
Yes.
And other people loved the teachers that we'd grown.
Yes.
So they'd get it.
Yeah.
And so I had this constant fighting to keep the experience that we developed.
Yes.
So I said to the 5 individually, go and have a look at the job. Have a look and see what they're going to offer you and the opportunities to develop and value your development and you as a person.
Yeah.
But in those days, the promotion was worth about £590 some.
Okay.
Quite a lot of money in those days, but not these days. And I said, if you think that the value of what you'll get in the other school, in monetary value, is not matched by what I will give you in terms of a promise that I will provide you with a training program, which would mean that you will be, in 2 years, you'll be ready for the next step.
Yeah.
Then go with my blessing and I'll give you a great testimony.
Yeah. Yeah.
All 5 stayed. 2 became deputies.
Fabulous, yeah.
2 became heads.
Yeah.
And 1 was a senior teacher.
Yeah.
And 3 of them did that in my school.
Yeah, and that really summarises the point about the word value, doesn't it? Because often people will hear the word value and think about cheapness.
Yes.
But actually, no, it doesn't mean that, does it? It means all of the things that are valuable to you.
Yeah.
So, that they resonate with core values that you hold inside yourself. That,
absolutely.
That they're meaningful, that they lead somewhere ultimately that might actually end up in financial reward or so on.
For me, I think part of if you feel valued within a circumstance, it has the capacity to fill you up.
Yes.
If you feel devalued or not valued in a situation, then it tends to deplete you.
Yes.
It makes you feel horrible. And so I think that for me, value is not just about money. It's about, do people recognise my contribution? Now, I have to add a caveat. If you're being paid peanuts and you can't afford to live, or if you think that you are being used and abused, that's very different. But that comes in, if that was going on, you would not feel filled up.
Yes.
You would feel devalued.
Exactly, yes.
But again, I keep coming back to, what value do you put on yourself? And it's not about, I put a value that I'm worth 70k, 80k a year. It's what value do you put on yourself as a human being? Are you confident about yourself? Do you like yourself? Do you love yourself? People who don't value themselves, they tend not to look after themselves.
I had another good example recently, actually, of somebody pointing out to me an area, a behaviour that goes on in my family where they are not valuing my contribution and that perhaps I ought to value myself a bit more and request that they acknowledge it in whatever way they feel comfortable to do it. And it's basically my son who sits down for his food, will more often than not complain about what's on his plate, but never says thank you. He never gets up from table and says thanks for the dinner, Mum, thanks for this. And it's part of a big wider context, but as a little bit of behaviour. And I realised that actually I was so used to it that I'd forgotten to even expect just a simple thank you. And just to be clear, I'm not expecting to grovel or go overboard.
No.
Just an acknowledgement. I've taken some time, I've provided some food. He may not have liked it. It probably wasn't McDonald's chicken McNuggets, so he doesn't like it as much. But even so, the act of, I've been fed, thank you very much.
I think the power of thank you is so profound.
Yeah.
I think there's again, whenever we talk, there's so many levels to talk about, aren't there? And I would urge anybody who is taking part in this, recognise the power of thank you, and recognise that it's important to acknowledge other people's contributions, and not to think, I haven't said thank you for a while, I'll say thank you, but actually to notice. And for me, particularly those people who are behind the scenes, the people who keep your place clean, the people who service what you do, saying thank you. But I wonder whether it would be worth, with your son, for example, all sitting down to dinner and putting out plates for the others and handing him an empty plate and saying to him, I don't think you ever enjoy or appreciate what's going on, so perhaps it would be better not to bother.
Yes. Perhaps you will understand the value of what you're being given when you feel the absence of it. Because
that's often what happens. It's only when we lose something that we value. How often do you hear of people who a relationship has died or a person has died, and they say, if only I could go back and tell them how much I love them. If only I could say to them, you were special to me.
Yes.
And why don't we do it when the relationship is live and the person is alive?
Yes.
And I would urge, again, everybody, tell people that you appreciate them, that you care about them, that you love them, and tell them often. But do it without an expectation that they will return it, because this is not about bartering.
Oh, no.
You value because you value.
Yes.
And whether they value back or not is not part of the deal.
It was really interesting to me because the point was made, actually, Rachel, I don't think you're valuing yourself enough by not asking for a thank you, so I think this needs to happen. And then the second point was made to me, and it will teach him to value himself by learning to say thank you, by learning common politeness, but actually the
much deeper
meaning
than that, isn't it?
Saying thank you, the gratitude and that soul feeling that you get when you do say thank you and you get into it, that teaches him to value himself.
I think we're back to this filling you up, this spiritual sense of that when you acknowledge the value of other people, that it also helps you acknowledge the value of yourself.
Because it's often true, isn't it, that when people have low self-esteem, when they have low value of themselves, and they treat themselves badly, they are often really very bad at seeing what other people do around them and acknowledging it. And it's possibly because they're inside themselves too much.
I think that can often happen, or they value everybody else and their contribution much higher than themselves.
Yes.
And for me, there's two little tests, and people who are involved in this, I'd be really interested to get your feedback. For me, the two little tests is, tell me 5 things that you really like and appreciate about yourself.
Right.
Now tell me 5 things that you don't like, which is easier.
Yeah.
And the second test is, how easily and how elegantly do you accept a compliment? Are you this old thing, or it was nothing, or just to say, thank you, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And those two tests, if I'm working with clients, will tell me a huge amount about the level of which they value.
Yes.
Another question that I ask people, and I think that would be worth asking yourselves, are the criteria that you use to measure and value other people the same as you use for yourself? Or do you expect more of yourself than you do of other people?
Yes.
And if people with low self-esteem, low worth, often expect so much more from themselves than they ever expect from other people.
Yes, yes. And it is true, placing it back into a business context, that if you give stuff away to people, they don't necessarily value it. Whereas if you ask them to spend money with you for something that you're doing for them, even if it's just a tiny amount, that engagement means that they value it a bit more.
They've got some skin in the game, haven't they?
Yeah.
And I know that can be very true of people when you're asking them to change, that if there is an incentive, and the incentive doesn't necessarily have to be money, but if there is an incentive that's external, that will often motivate them to be more engaged.
Yes, it's an interesting psychology point, isn't it? But just some contribution of something that is valuable, like money, for instance, puts enough motivation behind them so that even if they're struggling, and even if actually they know that what they're going to get out of this is far more valuable than just monetary gain, it's enough justification. Yeah, exactly. It's like a little mind game that you can do with yourself, which is, I paid that money, so I don't want to waste it. So you continue to remain committed to something. Whereas maybe if you hadn't paid anything, then the little voices would persuade you to say, well, you didn't pay anything.
It's a bit like meetings when people say they're going to go to a network meeting. If it's free and it's a bit rainy or they're a bit tired, they say, I won't bother. But if they paid to go, then they think, I don't want to waste that money, off I'll go. The whole thing, let's put this into the context of leaders and managers. And if you're leading a team of people, actually it's true of families too. If you're the matriarch or the patriarch of the family, one of the things that strikes me is it costs nothing to notice and to acknowledge people's contribution. And contribution, I don't necessarily mean that they've done anything, but who they are. I'm reminded, and I think it may be a generational thing, that when I was growing up, my dad would tell other people how proud he was of my sister, brother and I. Never tell us.
Right.
It would be my mum who would say, your dad's really proud of you. My dad's approach was always, you could do even better.
Right.
And it wasn't until my mum had been diagnosed with terminal illness and my dad and I were having a conversation, and I said to him, by this time my dad was in his late 60s.
Right.
What was your rationale that you would tell other people that you were proud of us, but you would not tell us? And he said, I didn't want you to get big-headed. I wanted to motivate you to do even better. And I said, what do you think about it now? And he said, I realise it was wrong.
Right.
There's a difference between saying everything's wonderful.
Yes.
And I think that's a danger that a lot of teachers and parents fall into.
Yes.
That in their skewed view is that you have to value everything, even when that value is over-egged.
Yes.
But when somebody does something which is the best that they can do, then it's important that they are acknowledged for that and that you notice that.
Yes.
And in a work context, saying to somebody, that's a job well done, that's really important, even if it's a job that they're paid to do. Because some people think that, you're paid to do it, it's your job. Why would I need to tell you that it's well done?
And the only cost to doing that is the time and attention it takes you to notice it and say it. And time and attention are two of the most valuable resources.
Well, we have three finite resources, don't we? Time, energy and money.
Yes.
And for me, energy and attention could be focus, whatever you want to call it. They're finite.
Yep.
And the important thing is to use them wisely.
Yes.
And for me, that acknowledging that somebody is doing a good job, even if it's the one that they're paid to do, is hugely motivating.
Yeah, agreed.
In the same way that if they're not doing what you're expected, to go and confront the issue, not the confrontation, and say, that's not what we expect of you, that's not good enough. In the same way, go back to your son. You know, the fact that you have a meal, that you are fed, and that there is no acknowledgement of that is actually not doing you a service, and it certainly isn't doing me a service. And I think, you know, recognising that you have a responsibility to yourself to value who you are and to make the best of who you are.
Yeah.
And you also have a responsibility for those people around you to acknowledge and value who they are.
Yes.
And if they have made a positive contribution, to recognise them.
Yes.
But it's not about only recognising when people do something.
No.
But just that you appreciate them as a person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, if you'd like to know more, there's lots of stuff on the website, genuinely-you.com. There are over 50 podcasts looking at all sorts of themes. There are videos, and you can download a free digital download of Thriving Not Surviving, the 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. Thank you so much for joining Rachel and I today. All our books are available on Amazon, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. So thanks again. Do let us know what you think and make some suggestions in terms of themes for shows in the future. This is Gina.